Rhamondre Stevenson has put together a great couple of weeks, but is he worth backing the brakes truck up for in Dynasty? That more today on the Dynasty Newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co-host, Chris Allen. Chris, is it a little too late to trade for Rhamondre or what?
No, well, probably. I'll say probably because this type of scenario where it is Damien Harris being out, we see Rhamondre work in a RB1 like type bell cow type role, and he did it. He smashed. He was like essentially everything that we wanted him to be, like outside of like breaking the century mark, but he still got like 2 touchdowns like on the day. So
Right.
we've got confirmation bias that Stevenson could be an every down back. Like we already knew it, but with actually seeing him have like the entire backfield to himself outside of like what Pierre Strong and but we knew that he could do this type of thing. So seeing it essentially shuts that window. But the only way that I think this could be like held open for contention is that, of course, and we'll talk about, we can get into the conversation about Damien Harris, like potentially like leaving in free agency, like blah, 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 blah. But could the Patriots add another running back like in the future? Could this continue to be like some sort of at least committee on paper, almost in the same way that once like Harris like joined the squad, it was, well, they could continue to use like some other back, or could they can continue to add like more pieces? Or I mean, it really took like Ty Montgomery like going on IR is like a huge factor like in this entire thing, because they've continued to add players like as they've developed this roster, as they continue to churn this roster like post like Tom Brady. So I can say that yes, like for right now, like the opportunity to trade for Rhamondre Stevenson is essentially shut, because unless they're on a team that is packing it in like for the season, like 6-7 weeks into it, sure, that's your window. Try and poach it from that type of player or that type of manager. But otherwise, if you want to try and look for the future, I mean, you can use some of that uncertainty and kind of in a way, but otherwise it's probably like if somebody has Rhamondre Stevenson, a 24-year-old running back who's on a, let's say, a decent team at this point, like still trying to figure things out. I mean, it'd be hard. I'd be hard pressed to try and acquire him, or at least trade him away at this point if I was a fantasy manager.
Rhamondre Stevenson is such a difficult valuation to nail down, with the fact that everything has gone right for him. Pretty much anything that you could have looked at the beginning of the year as a negative for Rhamondre Stevenson has completely fallen to the wayside, from James White to retiring to Damien Harris getting injured. So the past 2 weeks have made it essentially impossible to trade for Stevenson, because you can't bank on it, best case scenario indefinitely.
Right.
Is it in the range of outcomes for Damien Harris to be putting up the numbers that Rhamondre has by the end of this year? Yeah, and that's scary. That's really tough to trade for Rhamondre Stevenson right now, given that, I mean, it's the Patriots backfield, so don't get too comfortable. It's like Game of Thrones. Whenever you start liking a character, you know they're going to die. So,
Right.
and so and as soon as you think you've got a handle on the Patriots backfield, well, okay, Damien Harris is healthy again. What if Pierre Strong's role as a receiver develops? Something is going to blindside you. Last week, so you and I played Stevenson in GPP. Actually, he was having a pretty modest game until the end of the game. They got a fumble really close to the end zone, like a complete garbage time, and punched that in for a second touchdown. So the box scores look a little more enticing for him. It looks like monster performances rather than decent RB1 performances. So Stevenson is somebody who you might actually, I know nobody likes to hear it, but maybe think about trading away, just with the absolute ceiling that he is producing at right now. Literally nothing can go better for him right now. I mean, he played 90% of the snaps 2 weeks ago. Do you really think like we can continue to get 90% of the snaps from a Patriots running back? That's just, it's not going to happen. It is nice that they haven't brought somebody else in to try to like bring down those touches, because we haven't seen a 90% Patriot back in such a long time that you almost think someone comes off the street like a Kenyon Drake or something like that, and and takes a bunch of his opportunity. So at least they clearly like Stevenson. So I'm not saying that he is not a long-term dynasty asset. He certainly is, and he's worth considering. He's definitely going to next ranking run. He's definitely going to go a lot higher. The thing is just how long can he keep it up? He's not going to stay at this value forever. so maybe a trade candidate. But like you said, 24-year-old back, and yeah, I guess he is under contract for 2 more years, so that's good as well. I just don't think you can expect this for much longer. So if somebody's willing to trade for him expecting this, then that's fine. You probably trade him away. Otherwise, you're just happy to have him on your team.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the scenario where it just depends on where you're at, like in your fantasy season at this point, or your dynasty season. Because if you're sitting at, let's say, 4-2, even at 3-3, like 5-1, like that sort of thing, where you're comfortable in with your roster, you're comfortable with your squad, like at almost every single position. So having a guy like Rhamondre Stevenson, like on your squad, is useful to you at this point, as you are in like probably top contention, like for your league. But if you're sitting towards the back end, even if you are like 3-3, but if you look at your points for, you can see that you're a middling squad.
Sure.
I mean, you're 2-4. I mean, that sort of thing. That's where you could use like the workload, or even just the results. Let's say, not even say the workload, but let's say the results like from last week as a way to kind of, I don't know, send him off, like package him away, like, and, you know, grab a pick for next year or something like that. So you can start to rebuild your squad, because like we just discussed, I mean, Damien Harris, like he should return at some point. This isn't a season-ending injury for him, at least like not that we know of as of right now. And who knows like what the other running backs like on that roster are capable of becoming, let's say, a thorn in his side at some point. I mean, it wasn't, I mean, like Kevin Harris or Pierre Strong, like none of them really ran any routes like last week. So it's not like we should expect to see him completely like cede any of that work that we would want to see, like the passing down work that we'd want to see. But I mean, and Kevin Harris like did play in like some 2-back sets. Pierre Strong didn't play until the fourth quarter, so it did really seem like we saw him like in a complete like bell cow role. But this was a 1-week thing. Can we continue to see the Patriots plan? I mean, legitimately plan to have Rhamondre Stevenson be an every down back, like for the rest of the season. Damien Harris didn't even get that type of opportunity. So
Yeah,
I would
never.
say, I would say that this 1-week sample like would be kind of your jumping off point to like, you know, essentially say sell high. But this would be like a way you can use that type of information to your advantage. Like if you're in a position that you would need to sell him, trade him away.
That's an excellent point to bring up, because as a 24-year-old back, sometimes you look at it and you say, well, yeah, that could be a member of my rebuild. We can go buy Rhamondre Stevenson and be a part of my future plans. Well, yeah, probably not. I mean, even if this is the Cinderella ball season for Rhamondre Stevenson, it's probably not going to last. I mean, unless we completely go against Patriots football history, it's probably not going to last very long. So yes, trading away now if you're rebuilding is probably a good idea, even though you look at it in a vacuum and say he's a 24-year-old back. Why wouldn't I keep him on my team? Well, he wasn't a first round back. He's going to be have 2 more years on the contract. Patriots aren't going to usually pay their running backs. Damien Harris is going to leave next year. We don't know who they're going to add, but they're, of course, going to add someone. So let's talk about Damien Harris real quick, because we also have to figure his value in Dynasty as he goes into being a free agent. Harris is likely to become a free agent next year. Probably not going to pay him, especially with how Rhamondre Stevenson is doing. Is he somebody that you're looking to trade for and stash away for now?
Not particularly, because it seems like Damien Harris would be the type of back that he really is, not to say like scheme dependent, but for fantasy purposes, that he's more of the running back that you would want to have, let's say, in the right type of setup. And by the right type of setup, I mean he needs to really actually be like that bell cow type back. So let's say if, I don't know, the easiest situation I can think of would be if he were to move like to a team like the Texans. Even though, yeah, I know that Dameon Pierce is already there, but let's say if this was before last year's draft, and it was just Rex Burkhead, and they were just like kind of moving things along with some of the older running backs in the league, like at the running back position, and then Damien Harris were to be available next year, and then Damien Harris were to go to the Texans, especially considering the New England Texans ties that they're currently in place. That would be the situation where he would be useful, right? Because we can see him walking into, 3-down role, minimal pass catching work, and especially on a receiving core that is, handled by, let's say, wide receiver 3s, 4s, like somewhere in there. That would be useful to Damien Harris's value, like moving forward. But outside of that, where can we conceivably see him going where just his rushing potential allows him to be a fantasy, even RB2 at this point? Very few places at this point. I mean, could he go down to Miami? I mean, another in-division trade or in-division acquisition between the two, like the Devontae Parker thing, could be possible, and that could work out for him. But outside of that, I mean, there are very few situations where having a running back on your roster going to a team that, or having a running back on your roster that's only fantasy viability comes via the ground. It's just not the way, or not the type of running back that I want to acquire on my team. So that having some sort of pass catching component would be necessary for me. So if he goes to another team that's in an even worse situation, then it's harder for me to buy into that.
Yeah, Damien Harris gives me real Tevin Coleman vibes. So this is a prime example of why I will never, ever invest in a running back entering free agency. One, their value always seems to go up, whether it's warranted or not, just because people have such a affinity to be positive about player destinations. But the running backs never, pretty much every running back needs a specific scheme. And if a running back is succeeding, they're usually succeeding because they are in the scheme that they need to be in to succeed. And it seems like they almost never fall into another scheme that fit them when they were successful. So Damien Harris is pretty much built for the Patriots run scheme. And there's no guarantee that he ends up there next year. So we have I'm sure we'll be talking about it as he enters free agency in the offseason. There's going to be like 4 or 5 destinations that we really love, just like Tevin Coleman. And we're going to value him based on those destinations. Same thing's going to happen whenever Tony Pollard finally ends up being a free agent, right? So we're going to value them as those 5 destinations, and inevitably he's not going to end up at one of those 5 destinations, and the value was all for naught. And on top of that, players rarely ever get 50% of the workload or more in new situations. So if I have Damien Harris, I'm just waiting, and I'm going to trade him for a pick as soon as the buzz picks up, because once we run out of things to talk about in the offseason, we're going to look to free agency and we're going to see Damien Harris, and we're going to say, hey, wait, I remember when Damien Harris was good, especially if he finishes the season strong because he's not injured for the whole season. And
even if he was healthy now, think about the places that he can go, even like right now, like today, and I don't think his value would increase at all. It might even get worse. Like think about the Cam Akers situation out in LA. Cam Akers likely gone.
Where's he going to go? Yeah.
Where's he going to go? But think about the vacuum that it creates at the running back position. Could the Patriots move and send him, Damien Harris, like over to the Rams? Sure. But Harris's value doesn't go up in that scenario.
Yeah, true.
If anything, probably gets worse. Because now they have not one, but like let's say 2 or 1.5,
essentially the same back.
Yeah, essentially the same back on a team that now just lost their left tackle, and Joe Noteboom with a torn Achilles for the season. So that scenario, it gets worse. And also, what about, let's say, if the Panthers wind up trading away, they trade away Christian McCaffrey, it leaves a vacuum. Yeah, Damien Harris now goes to
worse team.
Yeah, to a much worse team. So it's just,
again, I mean, it just never works out. Just follow my plan. Look, you might be wrong 1 out of every 65 times, but you're going to be right 64 times. So just avoid trading for running backs during free agency. And I've talked about it a million times on the show. Just pay for the information. It's not going to be that much more. I would rather trade for Damien Harris after I find out that he went to the perfect landing spot than trade for him before he goes to the perfect landing spot and have no idea. And then he goes to the Panthers.
Yeah.
All right, before we get to Zach Wilson, let's talk about the Dynasty Newsletter and where we come from. We come from the Footballguys newsletter that will come straight to your email from Joe Bryant, contributions from Cecil Lammy, Sigmund Bloom. They're all working very hard to get all the news and notes straight to your email, so you don't need all those different apps sending you all those different notifications. If you miss some of the game, all you need is that one email. You scroll through the email, read through it real quick, and you've got all the information from the whole week that you may have missed. So please go subscribe to the Footballguys newsletter, and then we pluck some information from that to bring you the Dynasty newsletter. We're going to talk about Zach Wilson here, and just it really feels like time to discuss his dynasty value and if he's going to have any going forward. I'm getting real Josh Rosen from Zach Wilson. I think that he's tied to Robert Saleh, so even though I like Saleh, I might be getting short-lived vibes from him too. So Zach Wilson in Dynasty, I don't know. They're winning games, but his production has been lacking. We haven't seen any of the flashes that was his thing, right? Being drafted second overall was like, yes, but his ceiling, it's like, okay, well, it doesn't seem like we're getting that ceiling. So, I mean, what do you even do with Zach Wilson in Dynasty?
At this point, you're probably just holding in the
Praying.
event that, let's say, the Jets do the exact same thing with Sam Darnold, where they draft another quarterback in the first round, hold him for, they keep him for a few years, middling production here and there, flashes here and there, and then they wind up trading him to another squad in the hopes that he can rejuvenate his career somewhere. Because the sad part is that while fantasy quarterbacks, their value rises and falls like with their production, but in actual NFL, their value holds like pretty much until, unless something completely horrific happens or they just completely bottom out. Sam Darnold is probably the best case, or like
and teams were still thinking about trading early picks for Sam Darnold after he was just miserable for years.
Exactly. And so even with Zach Wilson having like the injury to start the season, you can probably give him at least some latitude, based off of like the way he's played so far, but none of the off season, the things that we expected him to have improved on off the season have really come to fruition. Like he's not managing the pocket like the way that we would expect like a quarterback like with his experience like should have been able to do at this point. He's still inaccurate like downfield. He's one of like he's bottom 10, like bottom 8 in terms of completion percentage over expected, EPA per play. Insert quarterback metric here. He hasn't shown any improvement at this point. And at that point, and also on top of that, he's bringing down like the rest of like his pass catchers as well. Outside of Breece Hall and Michael Carter, we've gotten to the point where Elijah Moore's fantasy value has completely bottomed out.
He was going to be next. Yep.
Yeah. We can talk about him in a minute, but it's just, if now he's starting to take away like from the rest of the pass catchers at this point, if he's somebody that you've drafted, you pretty much have to hold until we can find a way to salvage some of that value, which probably not going to come this year. It's most likely going to come in the next like couple of years, like while the team figures out like what they're going to do at the quarterback position.
Yeah, Elijah Moore basically tweeted, I'm not going to say what I want to say, but here's all the things that I want to say. So,
yeah.
So I don't want to create any drama, but here's all the drama that I would create.
Pretty much. Yeah, like saying a lot while trying to, while trying to not say a lot.
So Elijah Moore had 0 targets. And the targets are so low value anyways. And then just, and it happened last year. We saw Mike White and Joe Flacco succeed in this offense. So Robert Saleh might have a tenure after Zach Wilson, but they put themselves out on a limb taking him at 2. And it hasn't really bit them too hard because Justin Fields has struggled and Trey Lance has gotten injured. So at least they don't have those two excelling to make them look bad. But they probably wish they had Mac Jones, right? So It's a tough situation for that coaching staff. But back on Wilson, it's like we've seen Joe Flacco pepper Garrett Wilson three weeks in a row. Garrett Wilson was top 5 in targets in the entire NFL as a rookie. And then Zach Wilson comes back and it's like, what is this offense? And Breece Hall has been incredible, like top 99 percentile of what his outcomes could have been over the last few weeks. And Michael Carter's still getting it done. So they're winning based on their running backs, which is like the worst thing that you can do in the NFL in 2022 is be winning solely because of your defense and your running backs. It'll win playoff games, but that's just not today's NFL, right? Especially, I guess we're biased because we're fantasy people, but that's not how we want you winning games either.
Sure.
So Zach Wilson's value is just so tough because, like you said, he's going to be a starter for a long time just because he was taken 2nd overall. But he's going to be like a Jimmy Garoppolo. So basically, you probably just wait for his value to completely plummet until he gets in the range of like, let's say, Baker Mayfield was in that range for a little bit before he completely bottomed out, where it was like, he is a starter and I'll value him as a starter. And that's when you could probably trade for Zach Wilson. If you're in super flex, you could trade for him as a starter. The problem is right now he's being valued as a starter that's young, that has a high ceiling. It's like those things, the high ceilings just, I didn't see it when he was drafted, but I certainly don't see it now. He's played pretty much exactly how we felt he was going to play.
Yeah, and just to like look it up or to make sure that I was accurate in my assessment of him so far the last like couple of weeks, I pulled up on Sports Info Solutions. I just looked at his like clean pocket on target percentage. So it's like in the best possible scenario for quarterbacks, just to see if he's actually accurate, like with his passes. As of right now, like through the last like couple of weeks since he's been back, he is a 50% on target rate in that type of situation. I mean, it doesn't get much better like for quarterbacks, and 50% like on target rate, which is equal to Mitchell Trubisky, Justin Fields, Bailey Zappi. Those are the quarterbacks that have the exact same on target rate as Zach Wilson.
After last week, the Jets probably wish they drafted Bailey Zappi.
Like, not great. I mean, Kenny Pickett has
that
a
was
better
2 years ago.
Yeah, Kenny Pickett has a better on target rate like than than him. Yeah, Cooper Rush better. So it's like I don't know what to say. I mean,
and he's not rushing, really.
And he's not. I mean, he had the 2 rushing touchdowns like last week or something like that, which is wild. But still, it's like if you put him in just the most basic and simplistic situations, and he's not even up to par with the rest of the starting quarterbacks, then what are we doing?
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is he was drafted to be mobile, Patrick Mahomes light, right? And it hasn't been any of that poor play in the pocket, not getting out of the pocket, not extending plays enough. He just essentially hasn't reached any of the benchmarks that he should at this point, and he's making Elijah Moore very angry. In addition to Elijah Moore being very angry, there's another wide receiver that was very angry for the Panthers last weekend. Robbie Anderson had multiple arguments on the sideline and then ended up sitting on the Gatorade cooler by himself while the wide receivers were going over, and then eventually got kicked out of the game by the new head coach. So he was traded almost immediately because Hollywood Brown got injured last week. So the Cardinals went ahead. They saw Robbie Anderson sitting on the Gatorade cooler off by himself and then kicked out of the game and said, yeah, we'll take him. Yeah. So Robbie Anderson's heading to the Cardinals. Does this add any value for you?
No, it's more or less stays at the same value that he had beforehand, because how much more are we really trusting the Cardinals offense at this point? We had the best matchup like for Kyler Murray and the Cardinals offense just this past week against Seattle. I mean, through the previous 5 weeks, Seattle hasn't been able to stop anybody, anything. I mean, they hadn't put up a 3-and-out start like to any offense like through the first like 3 weeks. They've got into shootouts almost every single week, and yet Kyler Murray struggled to even have a passing touchdown like through 3 quarters. I mean, winds up throwing an interception, and at the same time he throws an interception and Hollywood gets hurt on the very same play. Wow. So it's I don't know what to think about this Cliff Kingsbury experience and like why both him and Keim and Kyler all got extended in the same. But that's a whole other conversation. I think we had that conversation like over the off season.
We did.
So I have my doubts about the Cardinals' ability to use Robbie Anderson the way that they should. And if he's just another body, I mean, okay, cool. Will the volume be there? Probably, because they don't have as many playmakers on the offense anyway. I'm still upset, and I brought it up in our Football Guys like base camp channel. I'm still upset that the Ravens didn't throw, a conditional 6th, if I remember correctly, or 6th and 7th, or conditional, something along those lines. Why didn't the Ravens
what are the Ravens doing? Like, what? Yeah. I mean, as much as I want to go on about the Cardinals, the Ravens just, how do you won't pay your quarterback, but you're willing to admit clearly that you'll put the entire team on his back and expect to win games. How does that add up?
Yeah, from a pick value standpoint, I thought that would have been right up DeCosta's alley to toss like that minimal draft capital at a receiver that could instantly help your team.
Right. Like with the Cardinals, is Robbie Anderson that much better than even like AJ Green at this point? Robbie Anderson's 29. He probably has more juice than AJ Green, but it's not going to be a big factor in the box score. But Robbie Anderson is immediately the second best wide receiver on the Ravens. I mean, no disrespect to Devin Duvernay, but Devin Duvernay is supposed to be more like an Isaiah McKenzie from last year type of player who's returning kicks, who's running gadget stuff. And then Devin Duvernay's had to be like a wide receiver one for them with Rashad Bateman out. It just does not make sense that they won't pay Lamar, but they won't help him either. It's like, how does that make sense? So you don't think he's valuable enough to pay, but he is valuable enough to carry your entire team. And that's what happens. You lose to the Giants.
Yeah.
So back to Robbie Anderson, I don't think that his value changes at all. He's not somebody that I'm looking to get onto any of my teams. He's going to be like a 3 to 4 target a game player. Can he take one of those targets for 70 yards at this point in his career? Still probably. But maybe in best ball, I might trade for him for something super, super cheap, like a late third or something. But in the standard league, I'm not looking for Robbie Anderson. The last player we want to discuss is Elijah Mitchell because he will be back from injury in a few weeks. Jeff Wilson has been okay in his stead, some good, some bad, and we really just like 49ers running backs. So just want to bring up Elijah Mitchell and kind of talk about his dynasty value over the next 3 weeks before, next week, maybe 2 weeks later, definitely going to be hearing him on waiver wire shows, on trade targets and dynasty, things like that. So we're just going to get a jump on that. What do you think about Elijah Mitchell coming back week 9? So we're going to get 7-8 games out of him.
Yeah, and I think that for managers that have Mitchell like on their bench, and they're kind of floundering at this point, I mean, there is some help on the way because it looks like at the very least over the past like couple of weeks, I mean, Wilson, we saw like more of Tevin Coleman over the past couple of weeks. I mean, TDP, they only played like one offensive snap like just this past week, but that number could be on the rise.
Just came back,
he just came back. So it seems like there's already a committee forming and they're looking to at least kind of scale back like Jeff Wilson's workload. And so if Mitchell does come back and he is healthy, now it could take a week or two for him to actually scale up his workload, but he was the starter. He was the one that, Shanahan and the rest of the 49ers offense were more comfortable with giving the workload like prior to. So if there is a chance like for you to wind up trading for or acquiring him at this point, I mean, yeah, I would try and stash him like if at all possible or acquire him right now, like for that type of run. So if you are the team that is, let's say, in the driver's seat like of your league, acquiring him at this point to make that like final season push like wouldn't be the worst idea.
Yeah, Elijah Mitchell could definitely be the type of guy that you needed to have to finish out your year. He was what, about a 4th round pick in
thereabouts, yeah,
in off-season drafts, and right around David Montgomery, even ahead of David Montgomery in some drafts. And he's just been completely forgotten just because he's been injured since week 1. So definitely throw out a trade for him, even in your redraft leagues, but even in dynasty. And he's got the potential to really break some slates, as the kids say, because of that 49ers offense. If they can get him over 60% of the snaps, which Jeff Wilson is not doing as of late. I think Jeff Wilson has fallen just under 60%. As you said, they're starting with a committee approach. But I think that's more to say about Jeff Wilson and less about Elijah Mitchell, right? Like, I don't think that committee stays when Mitchell returns.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everybody. So that's going to do it for today's Dynasty Newsletter. Thank you all so much for coming out. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, and we will catch you all next week.
Peace.